welcome to our Swift Talk, Ealing Wildlife Group Swift Talk. As you all probably know, we're running a campaign at the moment to crowdfund for a swift conservation project in Ealing. We've been talking about doing it for quite some time, and we decided 2022 we can't hold off any longer, and it's quite good timing because you may have seen this week that swifts were unfortunately moved to the red list of highest conservation concern. So it's a bird that is in trouble, like a lot of other species, but the promising thing is that it's a bird of urban landscapes that we can help, as you can see from the first slide here. So really thankful and want to welcome Edward Mayer, who runs swiftconservation.org, to talk to us tonight about swifts and really about what we can do to help them. So thanks a lot, Edward.
Thank you for inviting me.
No worries. I'm going to make you host now so that you can go through your slides.
Really good.
We'll reconvene at the end, and I'll put any questions that the gang have to you then.
Okie dokie. Righto. Well, thank you very much for inviting me. It's a great pleasure to be able to talk to you. I've got friends in Ealing who have got swift nest boxes up on their house. In Chiswick, who've got swift nest boxes up on their house, and they're the ones who introduced me to your group. So, of course, I went straight ahead and offered one of my talks, which luckily Sean accepted. This talk is called Swifts, the birds you can help. Now, that's very straightforward. You can help swifts. There's an awful lot of birds you can't help. You can't help cuckoos. Unless you're a huge landowner or an international organization, there's not much you can do, if anything, you can do to help cuckoos or nightingales or a whole host of long distance migrants. Not much you can do to help sandwich terns personally. You can only help by funding international efforts. But with swifts, there's an awful lot you can do to help. And I hope this talk tonight tells you a bit about swifts, maybe something you don't know already, and maybe also inspires you to help them even more. Swifts, I think, are the most spectacular birds that you can have above your head, above your house, in your house. They're the fastest bird in level flight in the UK. And until we got these incredible digital cameras, we could not see what they were doing because they moved so fast we couldn't focus on them. You'll have seen swifts drinking at ponds, rivers, that sort of thing. And when they do it, they're like this. They're so fast we can't focus on them. But here we have a swift drinking, and you can see it coming in with its beak down, and then it skims the water, just gets a few drops, and its body is millimeters above the water. Fantastic, absolutely fantastic control to get those few drops of water. Of course, swifts can't land. And that is why they have to skim water and to feed in the air. And here we have a swift catching an insect in the air. Now, this is probably a hoverfly, and you've seen hoverflies. They go zing, 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 zing. Try and swat one, it's almost impossible. But a swift is maneuverable enough in the air to catch them, to hunt them down and catch them. Now, the bigger the insect, the brighter it is, and the more evasive action it'll be taking. And things like flies and hoverflies will be using a tremendous amount of evasive action, but the swift is fast enough and nimble enough to catch them. In fact, swifts have been estimated to catch like 20,000 insects a day when they're feeding their young. And if you think how long it takes you to swat a blue bottle in your kitchen, you get an idea of just how nimble the swift is. Next, swifts mating. I think swifts are the only group of birds, only group of warm-blooded animals probably that mate in the air. I don't think bats mate in the air. I'm willing to be corrected. You can see swifts doing this pretty easily in like May. You'll hear some screaming in the sky, and you'll see two swifts going round and round in the sky, and then they'll go whirr, just like the water going down a drain. And at the bottom of that high-speed vertical dive, they will mate. And imagine the accuracy, delicacy, maneuverability that is needed to do that. I mean, not even Californian skydivers had managed to do this yet. So you can get the idea of just how nimble swifts are. Now, here we have the reason why they can't land. Look at the swift's foot. It has got 4 toes going forward, like that. 4 toes going forward, no thumb. It hasn't got a thumb. It's just got those 4 toes. So it can cling. It can cling to a tree, cling to a wall. It can progress along the ground. If it hits the ground, it can shuffle, but it can't grip. So it cannot hold on. Other birds have got 3 toes forwards, 1 at the back, an opposable digit. So they can, how can I say it here? They can grip like that. But a swift can only cling. And that really limits its abilities. So it flies all the time. It is safest of all in the air. Until aircraft came along, swifts flying at 8,000 feet on migration. There was nothing up there except swifts. I've actually seen them doing it. I've been 8,000 feet up a mountain pass in the USA, and I've watched swifts flying past in a driving blizzard going north on migration. White-throated swifts, I think they were. They're just amazing to see, but they're up there, they're safe. So life in the air, constantly flying, is the safest option for swifts. Swifts are capable of sort of stunning aerodynamic feats. This swift is bursting out of its nest box, probably at about 30 miles an hour. And a fast takeoff is great for avoiding predation, avoiding, the sparrowhawk attack, the waiting crow, anything like that. You bomb out and you bomb in again. And when they bomb in again, they can stop from about 30 miles an hour coming into the nest box. They can stop. Normally you'd flatten against the other side, wouldn't you? But they can air brake by pushing out all their wings and feathers and going almost vertical in the air to absolutely stop dead and then poof into the nest box. So fantastic, absolutely fantastic performance abilities of swifts. And you've got to look at them as a very successful design. Swifts have been around, we know, for 49 million years. And this is the proof. It was discovered about 2000, I think. It is the Senckenberg swift, found in oil shale deposits, fossilized in what is now the Rhine Valley in Germany, which then, 49 million years ago, was the right-hand side of a hot tropical sea that extended as far as Glasgow. And if you go into the museum in Glasgow, Natural History Museum in Glasgow, you will find case after case of the most incredible creatures. There are things there which I call Mohican sharks, because they're sharks with teeth sticking out the top of their head like that. I mean, God knows why. Nobody knows why they had teeth sticking out the top of their heads, but teeth they are. And then there were creatures like this, the Basilosaurus, an early whale, a mammal with blowholes. And the one thing you can say about the Mohican sharks and the Basilosaurus and everything else in the showcases in Glasgow is they are extinct. They didn't make it through to us, but the swift did. This swift here, squashed, preserved 49 million years ago, fell into that sea. But it is almost identical in size and outer shape to the North American chimney swift. And the chimney swift is still just about with us despite human activity, still quite a lot around in North America. So the swift could survive a period 49 million years ago, hot, humid, tropical, high carbon atmosphere, could survive that and come through all the way to us. Now, we've been around, estimates vary, 150,000, 300,000. I've looked it up, and seems to be a lot of dispute about how long Homo sapiens has actually been on the planet. But it's a blip of time compared to swifts. Swifts are a stunningly successful design. And this is what they do for us. They animate our skies. Swifts give us a tremendous bonus. These are photographs, time-lapse photographs from Barcelona. And I know Barcelona is an incredibly popular holiday resort, but I don't think it can be that much fun to live in, especially in winter. You've got flats like this. I mean, your view from your balcony is next door's concrete wall. It's even worse for this one. you may have some flowers in your balcony, but all you can see is a concrete wall just like 5 meters away. It's pretty grim. And most of the year, all you hear is traffic and the dustmen and drunken tourists dropping wine bottles in the streets at 2 a.m. And I've been in places like this, and that's what you do here. But it's all a bit dreary, really, until one day in April, you wake up and it's light, and you suddenly hear something and you think, what's happening? What's happening? And you open the shutters and whoomph, a swift just blasts past and another one follows it. And the sky's full of swifts. They've made it back from Africa. The earth is alive again. There's life out there. It's not just humans and concrete and cars and pollution. It is the real world breaking in, showing us the wonders of the planet, the wonders of all the living things in it. And what do they give us? Swifts give us a tremendous burst of joy and excitement. And here's a little bit about swifts and that migration run that brings us back to us in Spain in April and Britain in May. First of all, they're always flying except when they're nesting. Big migration run in nominally 14,000 miles, but you've seen swifts fly. They go all over the sky all the time hunting insects. A bit like taking your dog out for a walk. While it's on the lead, it's walking the same 3 or 4 miles as you do, but let it off the lead and it's all over the place. It's probably doing like 12, 20 miles to your 5. And so I think that's the same with swifts. I think swifts probably clock up 50,000 miles a year, more maybe, just zooming all over the place, feeding. Impossible to measure at the moment, but there we are. They winter in Africa. Now, swifts live from Ireland right over to, let's say, Beijing here. And more or less cover this area, a few in North Africa, and then they go right up to the Arctic. They have swifts in Bergen, there's swifts in Tromsø. A big range, and all of them, including the ones from China, who have the biggest migration run of all, they all come down to Africa here for the winter. In fact, I've been to Namibia a few years ago and I spotted them in Namibia flying overhead. It was just brilliant to see them there. They're faithful to their mates and their nests. And we think that this fidelity, the sexes migrate separately, but they come back and meet up at the nest, and they always go back to the same nest. Once they've chosen the nest, they stick with it. And we think this is because, well, when you think about it, a baby swift has to come out of the nest and fly straight to Africa. It can't hop around on the ground, fluffy, incapable of real flight, like, say, a baby robin or a baby blackbird. It can't do that. It's got to fly straight to Africa. So it's got to have full adult plumage, which means longer in the nest, average of 42 days in the nest, which is very long. So the sooner the adults can get cracking, the better. And if they come back and the mate is there, and they come back and the old nest is there, it saves them so much work. They don't have to find and seduce a new partner. They don't have to build a new nest. They've got it all ready. They can crack on with egg laying, incubation, and get the chicks off to Africa. So we think fidelity, and it's lovely to see them. When they meet up, they seem overjoyed. And I am one who, I empathize with animals. And I think, yes, they are full of emotions. I've seen my cat totally furious. They are full of emotions. They just like us in many more respects than we think. I think they are overjoyed, but that joy is really pays off. Happy swifts are good breeding swifts, I would guess. Slow breeders. Average is 1.5 chicks a year, but that can be nil in a really bad, cold summer. I mean, remember what Lord Byron said about English summers in Don Juan, his poem Don Juan. He said, the English summer lasts for 2 weeks in July, and it can be like that. And if it's like that, then the swifts probably won't breed. They'll kick out the eggs. They may try again later if it gets warm again later, but there just won't be the insects to feed them. Now, the converse of this is that in a good summer, they might have 2-3 chicks. And next converse of this is that they have long lives. I mean, your robin, your blue tit, great tit, even blackbird, probably lucky to last 2 years, 3 years. That's about it. Smaller birds, even less. But swifts average 7, 8 years and can get up to, there are records of swifts 19, 20 years old. So they can have long lives. It's quite a small bird, but a long life. One of the reasons for that is that they suffer little predation. Not many things can catch them. We're talking about hobbies, fast falcons, peregrines. Sparrowhawks will ambush them at the nest, and if they're nesting under tiles on sloping roofs, giving access, then gulls and crows can pull them out from under the nest. But predation is not a big deal. What is a big deal, what kills most swifts, is cold and starvation. And we have these, especially recently with the sort of rather savage changes to the weather we're getting, these freak weather events we're getting in Europe. You get the sort of scenario where the swifts are coming back over Spain. Spain's nice and sunny. They come over the Pyrenees, and France is terrible. It's raining, it's pouring, there's not an insect in the air. And if the swifts can't turn back because of high winds or whatever, they get soaked through. They're starving. They start doing this. They start huddling onto buildings and clinging together. And the next morning, most of them will be dead on the ground, I'm afraid to say. Other times, they just drop out of the skies dead. We've had this in France, we've had this in Switzerland, and most recently in Macedonia 2 years ago. Swifts, house-martins, swallows were just dropping out of the sky dead because the weather was appalling and there was no insects, and it's cold and it was wet. So that's the life of a swift, famous for their screaming parties. It's one of the few really social birds we've got. I mean, a lot of our birds flock together for the winter, like geese, waders, swans, but separate for breeding. Starlings, ditto. But swifts are communal all the breeding season. And they keep in flocks when they're in Africa too. So you have a social bird. And we know they talk to each other because the screaming parties, you can get a call and response. When you're between a building where swifts are and the swifts going past outside, you'll hear the swifts outside screaming, and with your other ear, you can hear them inside the nest screaming back. So we know there is an interchange of communication. What they're saying, we haven't the foggiest, but we do know they intercommunicate and they stick together. So that means that we can use swift calls to attract them to a new nest place. We play the calls, and instead of driving the birds away, which a lot of calls say for us, like a warbler will behave aggressively as soon as it hears another warbler calling and drive it out of its territory. But swifts don't have a feeding territory. They may want to drive people out of their actual nests, but they're not bothered about them outside. So using calls gets the swifts to look around for a nest place. That was the response. And it's really a very interesting phenomenon. It aids us in helping them. Now, here's the migration run. This swift was tagged near Cambridge on the 23rd of July. And then off it flew. And by the 26th of July, it's over Madrid. Then it feeds up over Madrid for a couple of days and makes a fairly leisurely journey down to the Congo, getting there on the 15th of August. And it spends all the time until the 9th of December, basically feeding on the insects over the Congo, equatorial rainforest, lots of insects. Our cuckoos go there too, precisely the same area. And then it did a little Christmas jaunt over to Malawi, pre-Christmas to Malawi. And then it spent Christmas and a lot of January in Mozambique. And then on the 24th of January, it starts its journey back. And by the 5th of February, it's back in the Congo. And on the 6th of April, a couple of months later, it leaves and goes to Cabinda. And then it does one of the most fantastic things imaginable. It flies over the sea for 3 or 4 days. until it hits Liberia, where it feeds up over Liberia. And if you think about this, 3 or 4 days over the sea with no water, can't drink salt water, and precious little insect food, 3 or 4 days with no water and hardly any food. That is a tremendous achievement. Feeds up over Liberia and then flies across the Sahara. And it does that from the 28th of April to the 1st of May. So another 3-4 day flight over the Sahara. Precious little water, precious little food, possibility of sandstorms. It's a tremendous feat. I mean, how far could you run without, how long could you run without water? A couple of hours, 3-4 hours before you collapsed? Swifts can go hell to hell, like hell for leather, high-speed flight for 4 days with no water and no food. Then it feeds up over the Atlas Mountains, goes across to Morocco, feeds up for 3 days, and then it leaves on the 6th of May, and 2 days later, it's back in its nest box in Cambridge. Now, 2 days to cover the Straits of Gibraltar, all of Spain, all of France, the Channel, and southeast England. That is really a stunning performance. Now, people often ask me, where did swifts nest before? They nested in our buildings, as if really they shouldn't be nesting buildings, sort of thing. But the fact is, they nested in trees. They nested in old woodpecker holes in ancient trees in ancient forests. And they probably did this in some quantity. But as we have chopped down virtually all the ancient forests in Europe and worldwide, subsequently, swifts have had to follow the timber into our homes. And you'll find vestigial populations of swifts still in Poland, Scotland, Sweden, Russia, and Germany, small numbers. We don't know much about Russia. We think there are probably quite a lot out there, but nobody's looked really, not that I know of. And we are in touch with swift experts in Irkutsk by Lake Baikal, but we haven't got this sort of information. We've got information about the local populations, but not about the nesting in trees. So try and find out more. This is Białowieża forest in Poland, a primeval forest. Hasn't been messed around with much until very recently, when it has been messed around rather a lot. It's under threat now. Legal action by the European Commission is trying to stop the Polish government from chopping chunks of it down. But at the last count, it had 600 swifts nesting in ancient woodpecker holes in ancient hornbeam trees. This is Scotland. This is the Abernethy Reserve of the RSPB, where you've got ancient Scots pine, sort of open forest with lots of dead trees in. And this is ideal for swifts. They use the old woodpecker holes here. There's about 30 nesting here, I think, 30 pairs nesting here, supported for years now by the RSPB, putting up extra nest boxes and keeping an eye on them. And down here, we have an example of what these sort of nests look like. This is an old oak tree in southern Sweden. And you can see the woodpecker hole is truly ancient because the bark has grown over. And as a young swift, you can tell by the very white face, pale face, looking out at the world. So that's where they used to nest. And now swifts are secret nesters. They're nesting almost only in buildings. And it means they're very safe from predators, but they're highly vulnerable to maintenance work or demolition, which often accidentally destroys swift nests. Now, here are some examples from all quite near to us of nesting in buildings. This is outside Lincoln, and here the swifts are nesting under the pantiles, or they're actually nesting on the sagging roofing fold, which a lot of pipistrelle bats do too, I understand. It's a popular place, but people having their roofs replaced don't know that. And it's a terrible surprise when they find baby swifts or little bats crawling around when they've taken all the tiles off. It's a bit of a shock, and really it's something you've got to guard against. This just shows the sort of, opportunistic building by swifts. We never found out what happened to this brick. It's in Belgium somewhere. A friend of mine photographed it in Belgium. Never found out what's happened to this brick, but it's got holes in it, and swifts are nesting in it. You can see the wings sticking out, and here's another swift coming in to take its turn on the nest. Now, this is a post-war British house. You can tell it's post-war because the eaves gaps, these sort of gaps where swifts would have nested once and bats got in, have been blocked up by the building regulations. Building regulations say post-war building regulations say the eaves, gables must be grilled. But this swift has found a way around that. It's crawled up this tile feature and is nesting behind the gutter, but in the gap between the roof here and the stack of tiles. There's a gap it's got in, it's nesting on the loft floor. Down here, we have a barn in Sweden and pan tiles again, and the swifts are just nesting on the wooden beam behind the pan tiles. You can see this fascia board is nailed roughly onto the beam. It holds the building up, holds the roof up. The swifts have wriggled in and are nesting on it. And what it shows is that the swifts will nest opportunistically wherever they can find just enough space to squeeze in, they will. Same with bats. This is a real Botchford job. You can see the swifts are trying to land on the shiny plastic drain pipe. I think they're nesting up here. I think they're getting in behind here and nesting on this plastic soffit board. It can't be capped off at the end, but swifts are always doing this. They're always finding somewhere suitable to go in and nest. Suitable for them, maybe it's simply the result of a badly built house or badly repaired house or building, but they will find the gaps, the defects, and they will use them. And this is what swift nests look like. You won't see them unless you're into demolishing buildings. You're unlikely to see a swift's nest. And these are all photographs following some sort of demolition or repair. Up here, we have a swift nest. It's made, of course, from stuff gathered in the air. Swifts don't land, right? So they pick stuff up while they are flying through the air. On a windy day especially, you'll see swifts flashing around with feathers and leaves in their beaks, and they come back and they stick them together with their saliva into this sort of papier-mâché looking type nest. And what it's got is moss and pigeon feathers and bits of grass, dried grass, all around have been stuck together. And there's a day-old chick and there's an egg. And that's what the nest looks like. But all too often, you're going to miss it. Here is a nest. Looks just like a handful of scrunched up dried grass, but it's a swift's nest and it's just sitting there. Perhaps it's been displaced, but it's sitting there on the rubble found when they took the roof off. Very old roof, walls filled with rubble of any old sort, just tossed in to fill the spaces up. And there the swifts have built a nest. So you've got to be quite sharp to pick them out. Again, swifts are highly opportunistic, and this is a blind box, a roller blind box. This actually is in the White City in Tel Aviv in Israel. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site of 1920s art, 30s, 20s, Art Deco mansions. And these sort of roller blinds, these big wooden or metal roller blinds, were used on buildings all around the Mediterranean, especially in Spain and Italy and Albania, from about 1880 to around about the Second World War. And they're still there. And when they're down in summer, there's space in the box for swifts to creep in and make a nest and lay their eggs. And if you go somewhere like Rome or Seville or Toulon or any of these big towns with 19th century, early 20th century developments, you will find huge numbers of swifts. And one of the best places is Tirana in Albania, which was built with using Italian type design quite early on. So the government area of Tirana is all Italianate buildings with the roller blinds. And when I stayed there 3 years ago, it was a mass of swifts. Our hotel, which was in the government sort of district, was absolutely stiff with swifts. Every dawn they came bursting out of the roller blind boxes and shooting around the building. It was sheer heaven. There were thousands of them. And this sort of, as buildings and blind boxes are replaced, this sort of nesting is being eliminated. So you've got to watch it really, because big populations could go in these places. We spent a lot of our time working with Italians and the Spanish bird organizations, sort of trying to boost consciousness and support them in their efforts. Here we have a couple more examples. This is when a gable board was taken off a pub in West Horsham in Surrey, and they found swifts nesting in these terribly confined spaces on the brick ends of the gable. That's where the barge board went down. You can see the painted edge there. But amazing what you find. And this is a church roof. They took off the pan tiles and they found huge amounts of dried grass. and here and there a swift nest. And what seemed to happen here was that every time they cut the grass in the churchyard, it dried out, and the swifts and the sparrows took it up, stuffed it under the tiles, and made their nest. This was swifts and sparrows. But it's amazing what you can find after, say, 50 or 100 years of nesting in between tile replacements. Generation after generation of birds has come in and built up their nests. But swifts are in trouble. And you've seen some hints as to why they might be in trouble because of what we do to buildings, but it gets a bit worse. Loft insulation is known to force out nesting swifts. Building regulations are getting tougher and tougher. And generally speaking, rule out the access of any creatures, apart from, say, humans and germs, into modern buildings, which are forced air ventilated. Eco homes have pumped ventilation. You get air conditioning on bigger buildings, and that means that there's no ventilation system, no ventilation slots or gaps that would let in bats and small birds. So virtually every modern building being built is useless for birds, useless for bats, especially useless for swifts. Re-roofing and demolition, you've seen how vulnerable they are. This is a bucket full of dead swifts found at a demolition site in Belgium. A bit more about that later, maybe. Modern architecture, swifts can't nest in new buildings. They're sealed, they're air conditioned, they're forced ventilated. Even the much vaunted eco home, which is supposed to be so good for the environment, is in fact utterly useless as a home for wildlife. It is wildlife free. So you can sit there behind your treble glazing, and behind your treble glazing, you'll never hear the birds sing. And you can sit there in your pumped air, not daring to open a door or a window because you lose all that economy in your heating and ventilating. And you won't share it with wildlife at all. It'll be a sterile little place, your home. And inadequate legal protection. I've explained that swifts need year-round protection because they always come back to their nests, and so the nests need to be protected. Now, in Britain, they aren't. In England, they aren't. In Scotland, they've got some protection, the unoccupied nests. And in some continental towns, some European towns, swifts have protection effectively all year round, but not here in England. Then, if the nests are not in use, the nests are not protected and can be destroyed. So bad. And then you find all these little gizmos that are being offered all over the place to sort of, repress wildlife and get rid of wildlife. And here I found this wonderful 16th century house, a beautiful 16th century townhouse, and it was being restored. As part of the restoration, they were fitting anti-bird and bat cones to the eaves to stop these creatures coming in. I thought, well, they've been coming in harmlessly ever since the place was built in the 16th century. Why stop them now? They're not doing any harm. This building is still here. It's still beautiful. It's being done up, so it'll be good for another few hundred years. Why stop the birds and the bats? Why are we so exclusive? Why are we so squeaky clean? Why can't we bear to have wild animals around us? What's wrong with us? Are we really of this planet, or are we something planted here by flying saucers? And I do wonder sometimes. I mean, when I open the kitchen door and a toad hops in, I am delighted. I'm absolutely delighted. But a friend I had round to breakfast, when the toad hopped in, he was almost sick. And I had to pick a toad up and pop it back in the garden. I mean, I do not understand that. I just don't. There we are. The main problem is exclusion. And we know from surveys that 10% of pre-1919 houses have got some sort of holes that are good for swifts, good for birds, good for bats. It drops after the First World War, and it drops really after the Second World War when the building regulations are changed adversely. And my guess is that this sort of building here is useless. I'd photographed this because of the crazy decoration on it, but it's a Primark in Cologne, and it's, in my book, this is a pretty ghastly sort of building. It's got bird-killing glazing. It's supremely ugly. It looks cheaply and nastily built, and it's useless for any wildlife except feral pigeons. We've got people sitting at tables down here who'll be dropping food crumbs and waste, and the pigeons will hang around up here waiting to be the first bird at the dropped sandwich. So they'll be sitting all around these railings, and that's all that's going to happen here. Peregrines can't use it, swifts can't use it, house martins, swallows can't use it, only feral pigeons can use it. And that is really the fate of our city centres. It's us, feral pigeons and rats. And there's going to be no other wildlife there unless we do something about it. Insecticides are causing insect declines on a massive scale. And of course, swifts are purely insect feeders. They eat nothing except flying insects and some drifting spiders. This terrible change in the past 30 or so years to the insect populations is just appallingly worrying. Entomologists in Germany found that the biomass of invertebrates caught fell by nearly 80%. I've got a friend who's an insect photographer in Denmark, which is a intensively farmed country if ever there was one. And she tells me that it's more or less pointless trying to photograph insects now in Denmark. There are so few left. Now, how is this? Well, I'm indebted to Professor David Goulson of the University of Sussex for this slide. Professor Goulson interviewed local farmers and asked them for their spraying lists. And this farmer treated one crop of oilseed rape, 22 times with insecticide, fungicide, herbicide, fungicide, molluscicide, herbicide, fungicide, fertilizer, fungicide, slug pelleter. It just goes on and on and on. The net result is there'll be nothing there, nothing except the crop and things that eat the crop directly, like wood pigeons, and then things that eat wood pigeons directly, like buzzards. And there'll be some crows around as well to eat the pests that have been killed. So when the slugs are dying, the crows will be in there eating the slugs. But other than that, there'll be nothing. There'll be no small birds at all. There's nothing to eat. There's nothing to keep their chicks going with. There's no soft insect food. And this is the real monstrosity of what's happening now. We are cutting ourselves off from our life support. Swifts, meanwhile, I'm afraid, heading for extinction. They declined by 58% over this period. They're now red listed this week. We knew it was going to happen. Figures were terrible, and it's time to do something about it. Otherwise, like the great auk, they'll go. Now, why does it matter? Why does wildlife matter? Well, very briefly, our survival depends on it. And to quote here, Paul Ehrlich, our civilization depends utterly on the plants, animals, and microorganisms of Earth. Essential ecosystem services, crop pollination, protection, to supplying food from seed, maintaining a livable climate. And we need wild things. This is a solitary wild bee, the leafcutter bee, and it is a much more efficient pollinator than honeybees are. Look at that big bottom, all covered in pollen. That's what it uses for pollinating. It is a highly successful pollinator. And did you know that bluebottles, that common fly, are essential for pollinating carrot crops? In Canada, farmers buy bluebottles to release over their carrot crops to pollinate them. What a state of affairs. And how nature can help us even more. Stunningly, the UK government has figures that show that between these years, 17 and 18, a quarter of the adult population were prescribed psychoactive drugs for sleeplessness, depression, and anxiety. That's 1 in 4 of us. When what the government also says, spending time in the natural environment, whether as a resident or a visitor, improves our mental health and feelings of well-being. It can reduce stress, fatigue, anxiety, and depression. It can help boost immune systems, encourage physical activity, may reduce the risk of chronic diseases such as asthma. It can combat loneliness and bind communities together. Right on. Green space means you feel good. And this lady, Dr. Vicky Houlden, she matched up Londoners' addresses with their feelings of self-worth, happiness, life satisfaction, and their nearness to green space. And amazingly and wonderfully, she found that the further away you were from green space, the worse you felt. If you were a kilometre away from green space, you felt pretty much in the pits. And if you were close to it, you felt pretty good. Well, that's a really good advertisement. However, the government is not helping. The government has failed to meet UN objectives. It failed on 17 out of 20 biodiversity targets agreed in Japan. In 2010, the 2019 State of Nature report found that populations of our most important wildlife had fallen by 60% in 50 years. That's in my lifetime. And I have seen changes. If I think back to my childhood, I've seen changes I just would not think possible. Yet government funding is only 0.02% of UK gross domestic product. It's more or less what you get on your building society accounts these days, maybe a little bit more. Public sector investment in conservation has fallen in real terms by 33% in the past 5 years. That is government cuts. So all creatures like this, which are suffering terribly from what we are doing to the environment, different reasons: sandwich tern, overfishing, lapwings, farming, insecticides, drainage, burning, all sorts of things, curlews, burning moors, overuse of wetlands, vanishing wetlands, all suffering terribly for different reasons. They can all be helped, but not by the government, they're not. Now, why do urban areas really matter for wildlife? Why does it matter so much that we help swifts? Well, research by Sheffield has shown that urban areas in the UK now hold more species than the countryside. The countryside is now so inhospitable, a lot of species can only survive in towns, unbeknown to us, without our doing anything about it, because we're not spraying towns, and because towns are full of multiple environments: brownfield, cricket pitches, sports ground, allotments, canals. The canal in Woking is an SSSI, it is so rich in wildlife. All sorts of environments, rooftops, roofs of factories with birds nesting on them, gull colonies, all sorts of things that aren't happening elsewhere are happening in towns, willy-nilly. And they're basically becoming nature reserves. You can do lots of things to help them, like this green wall here in Spain, but willy-nilly, towns are supporting more wildlife than the countryside. And one example, trees. Camden and Croydon have about 30% tree cover, and this is why I live in London. This isn't the street I live in. I don't live anywhere as ritzy as that, but this is not too far away from where I live. I live in Camden, and we have lots of trees in Camden. And you compare our 30% tree cover in Camden and the support of tree nesting species, insects, everything in the trees, with Lincolnshire. This is Lincolnshire. It's been called by John Monbiot the chemical desert, because less and less can live there because of the high levels of insecticides and agricultural chemicals poured on the countryside, and you can count the trees quite easily. There's hardly any of them. So you start to see why towns, villages, human habitation is so important to wildlife. And the answer is to build in biodiversity. Now, this is the Barbican development in London. You'll know it. I saw it being built. It was a brutalist concrete jungle when it was built. There was no life in it anywhere. These ponds were there, but they had no planting at all. The whole thing was just bare concrete. But that got on people's nerves. And also, they've got a huge art centre over here, theatres, cinemas, library, concert halls. They've got to get people in, and people won't sit in a brutal concrete pit. They want a bit of relief. And so they planted it. Last time I was there was a grey heron standing here, and there's coots and wagtails around all the time, and there's quite a lot of ducks and other things turn up, but you can hear birdsong. It's like being in a mountain pass or something like that, or rocky, craggy countryside, karst countryside in Yugoslavia, for example. You've got the limestone, and you've got the plants and the water. That's the sort of life you're creating, that sort of environment you're creating. And so people sit at the restaurants along here, people sit out and have their meals while the birds sing, and it's nice, it's relaxing. Now, by 2030, over 90% of the population will live in towns. We know it's not good for you, but you can reverse it by doing things like this. And how do you do it? Well, I push actually train architects in urban biodiversity concepts. And a lot of the things they're doing are simply too complicated, too expensive, and too risky. I go for the simple, practical, low cost, low risk ideas. Creepers up walls. To get green walls, plant them in the earth. Simple berry bushes like this berberis. Sainsbury's and Tesco use them for their car parks, and they get waxwings pouring in. Birds love these berries. They're also vandal proof because they're spiky, so people won't dig them up to take them home. And this is an 18th century pond in Nancy, which has been converted to be a wildlife pond by the simple expedient of putting rocks around the edge and plants in it so that wildlife can get in. Wildlife doesn't have to sort of fall off the rim or can't drink because it's too low, water's too low. Wildlife can crawl in and out, and so you turn it into a wildlife pond. You've got to have shelter and habitat. You've got to have food, not handouts, not feeding stations. Food comes from plants, nectar, pollen, fruits, berries, insects, and clean, drinkable, not treated water. A lot of fountains that they put into developments these days have to be treated with bromine or chlorine to stop Legionnaire's disease. It's the law. If you've got a fountain that aerosols into the air that you can breathe in, like in Trafalgar Square, where you can smell the bromine, it has to be sterilized with bromine, which kills off any chance of wildlife using it. So trickles like this do not aerosol. So you've got to have the right sort of water. And nesting and resting sites, they have to be built into all new build and infrastructure and reduce biocide use. We've got to have the insects for the birds, for the swifts, for the bats. So if towns like Paris, Strasbourg and Nancy, this is Nancy, they have not used chemicals in their public gardens and parks since 2005, and they're lovely. Paris, they've got this green mayor now, they're replanting the trees, they're licensing people to cultivate the plots around the trees. Think what this means. Instead of giving loads of money to international chemical companies and covering your borough with glyphosate several times a year, instead you employ a few unemployed people to do gardening around the trees or gardening in the parks and do the hand pruning and weeding. You give them money, you give them a job, they start paying into the tax system, they're off benefits, taxes go to support us all and keep the NHS and everything else going, they get a pension out of it at the end. You are regenerating civil society and not pouring money into international chemical companies' pockets. It's a no-brainer. You've got to do it. And Paris, Strasbourg and Nancy and a load of other places have, but not many people, not many boroughs in the UK yet, but it has to be done. You can use almost anywhere to generate insects for your swifts, for bats, for wildlife. Here are some examples ranging from the absolutely cheap to the utterly expensive, which I've seen on my travels. This is in West Hampstead. They persuaded Camden not to pour glyphosate onto all the street tree patches several times a year. And people are now, this is just around the corner from me, people are just starting to grow all sorts of plants around their trees. And it's just jolly and nice, and it gets the insects going. This is Walthamstow Village, where for the Queen's Diamond Jubilee, local people took over a vacant patch and planted a wildlife meadow, just a little wildlife meadow. When my wife and I walked past, it was full of grasshoppers. Great. When do you hear grasshoppers? This is outside our hotel in Antwerp some years ago, beehives and sedums. And we found, looking out with our binoculars, we found loads of roofs. There's little bits of roofs had these very easy to create roof gardens and bees. This is Vienna, where the hire bikes, they've used grasses to stop people taking a hire bike and shoving it straight in front of a tram and killing themselves. They've got to walk round the end and go to the crossing, you see. But as a safety measure, it also extends the big park over here. And so it's useful for insects and useful just to get a bit more green. This is a super expensive green roof in Lisbon, Portugal, just getting down towards the docks. Now, Lisbon is sited on the River Tagus, and on the other side of the Tagus, there's loads of salt pans, huge numbers of birds, waders, wildlife, all sorts, moving around all the time. And this gives insects and birds a refueling stop. There's lots of patches in Lisbon of green and big parks, so they have lots of choice. They can move around, they can move through on migration and refuel. Now, Eric Kaiser, who taught me just about everything I know about swifts, was the first chap to set up Home Swift Colony. He studied swifts with David Lack at Oxford, then went home to Kronberg outside Frankfurt, and had a 4-story Victorian house, started drilling holes into the walls up top and putting nest boxes on the inside. This is inside the gable. And now he has 90 swifts on average breeding every year. He showed you could do it at home. And solutions can be simple. You can buy a nest box and put it up. You can convert the gables. This is, you can see the beam ends coming here. This chap, Roland Giddy, with 2 bits of wood, while the front of his house was scaffolded for redecoration, converted this bay into 4 separate swift nests. They had to be separate, otherwise the swifts will fight. This is a Dutch social housing end of terrace fitted with swift bricks, and this is a swift brick. It's a hollow concrete nest box. This was the first on the market about 60 years ago, I think, and German. And with my encouragement, we have got about 8 manufacturers knocking out these things in the UK now. You can buy all different sorts, metal ones to be fireproof, plastic ones to go into solid walls, or terracotta ones. All sorts are now available in the UK. They are great for new build. It can be as simple as this. I've got a friend in Brussels. Brussels used to be, my wife used to work at the European Commission years ago, and I used to visit Brussels then like 30 years ago, and it was run down. And a lot of the buildings were falling to bits, and they were full of swifts, you see, because, I mean, these sort of boards had rotted away. There were holes, gaps, swifts had got in and were breeding like bilio. But now Brussels is, it's been smartening up and got richer and richer and richer, like everywhere else, really. And everyone's doing up the old knackered buildings and forcing out the swifts. So my friend goes around and she teaches people how to make the right size holes, 65 by 28 mil, and only swifts can get into them. And maybe sparrows too, but that's no problem. They need help as well. And you can put a whole line of swift holes into one of these buildings in this boxed soffit, and it doesn't affect the building at all, and the swifts have a home in perpetuity. This is Brighton NHS Trust, and this is the use of swift bricks on a refurbishment project. The staff at the General Hospital in Brighton knew that swifts were nesting where there were rotted metal ventilators. This is a turn of the century or late Victorian building, I think. And they had metal grill ventilators here, which had rusted away. And so they said to the project management, can we keep the swifts? And they found a company that made swift bricks in a matching color, slotted them in there. And they've now got more swifts than they ever had before. It can be done. That's the swift bricking close up with a different color front. But you can get, this chap will fit any sort of stone or brick to the front. Quite a few manufacturers will. This is how you can turn swifts into an artistic project and how you can get a real name for your building. This is a nice building in Tyre Street, known informally as the Swifts building. We advised on how to get the swifts in, play calls, size of the boxes, and this chap went ahead and built them. But what he didn't tell me was he was getting an artist to create this intaglio mural of swifts sliced out in the white brick, which makes it totally distinctive, makes a real feature for the building. When the swifts move in, it's going to be just fantastic. It's down in Battersea. You can potter along and see it quite easily. This is a rescue project in St Neots. Swifts often need rescuing. They nest. In this case, they were nesting in a nearby factory, which was demolished to make place for housing. And bingo, they needed somewhere to go to. So actually, this is just across the road from my mum. My mum lived around the corner and she told me all about this, you see. We knew she knew the factory was going to be demolished. So we got the local Swift group, Action for Swifts in East Anglia, who specialise in church nest boxes, and they negotiated with the vicar and the church wardens and the congregation and the bell ringers, and they got everybody on board, and they put in swift nest boxes. They don't interfere with the bells, they don't let in pigeons, the birds can't get inside. They're just going to be one big asset, and being up there, you can hardly see them. And it's been so successful, this project. I mean, the factory was demolished. It's been so successful, this project, they keep adding more nest places. From starting off with about 12, they've now got 47 in use. Great for publicity. And it's a stunningly beautiful church. It's one of these angel roof churches, huge, and with angels all up and down the roof beams inside. And they have nice concerts in summer. It's a really good place to visit. Do swift walks. I mean, you're doing swift walks already, I think, and the purpose is to count the low-flying, screaming swifts, and it's ones at rooftop height. Higher up could be from anywhere. Note the exact locations, keep local records. You send them to the RSPB with the Swift Mapper app you can download free on your phone, and then also, please, send them to the British Trust for Ornithology's Breeding Bird Survey and Bird Track surveys. Those are really good things, and unlike the RSPB stats, the BTO stuff is used by DEFRA. So if they are studying birds, if they are taking notice of bird populations, it's the BTO they go to for the facts. You can find out all the links for this on our homepage. Just go to our website, Swift Conservation, and you will find all the links and info you need. And here's people out in Oxfordshire doing a nice swift evening with Chris Mason. Building work can help swifts or it can wipe them out. This was a terrible tragedy in Antwerp. These warehouses were knocked down and all these swifts were killed. It's a famous colony. This was done on Sunday morning when there was hopefully nobody around, but in fact the local bird recorder was cycling past to census the swifts. He stopped the job at great personal risk, called the police. The people were fined €80,000, something that happens on the continent, but has never, ever happened in the UK. I don't know of a single case, despite many such incidents. They had to put swift bricks in the new replacement warehouse. But this can happen. Any older building may have swifts and bats in it. Ensure they are protected. You know these buildings. You can see when they're going to be worked on. Don't let it happen. Safeguard local colonies. Victorian Edwardian street in Ealing is probably got swifts tucked in under loose tiles, loose flashing. Somewhere around here in the church maybe there's probably swifts. Keep them nesting, find them, record them, protect them, and then help with more nest places in rebuilds and renovations. Exploit prominent sites for swifts. This is Ealing Town Hall. Look at it, it's almost like the Natural History Museum, isn't it? It's a fantastic building. Surely you could get some swift nest boxes up there paid for by the council. Surely they would welcome swift cams in the boxes. And when you go into the foyer to pay your council tax, you can see the swifts in their nests like they are in lots of buildings on the continent. So yeah, why not? Get out there and tackle them. You can only try. Use swift calls to attract them. I think you know all about this. It works well. This is the basic kit for using the MP3 recording. You can buy it from this setup will cost you about 30, 40 quid. We sell a CD for 6 quid by post with full information. We sell the MP3 recording for 2 quid as a download. All helps to keep us going and it gets swifts into their nests. Our calls are really good, they're really excellent ones. We need 20,000 swift bricks a year. These are 3 public libraries, Colompton, Antrim and Bournemouth. And the council were easy to persuade. They need biodiversity projects. They need green ticks in their boxes. And swift bricks are so easy, so cheap that they'll just pop them in for you, especially if you hop up and down a bit. But they will do this. I mean, helping stag beetles, it is bloody difficult. Helping swift, it's easy. You buy a swift brick, stick it in, it's there for the life of the building. No maintenance needed, no cleaning needed. New homes must help swift. So when you see new homes, plan for your area, demand swift bricks. This isn't the Isle of Wight, could be anywhere. You've got to ask the planners to specify swift bricks, bat boxes too. They can all be built into the buildings. They cost next to nothing. People will blow 500 quid on a bathroom tap. A swift brick at 30 quid, it's zilch. Developers will put them in just to get you off their backs. Just keep nagging until you get them in. Here, Isle of Wight, they slap them in. Neighbourhood plans, planning permission. When you're commenting, ask for features that compensate for habitat and wildlife loss. Tell the planners what's threatened, what's being lost. It's got to be augmented these days. This is a housing development in Derby. They slap Swift bricks all down the side here. Here they are being put in. And you can see people like doing good. Building workers like a bit of excitement, a bit of interest. It can be a very boring, very tough job sometimes, especially in winter, and high accident potential, and it's hard work, risky work in many cases. A bit of fun, visitors to the site, bit of fun, nice people telling them how they're being good, helping things. It all brings a bit of joy into the job. The Environment Act this year, will it be helpful for Swifts? Well, could be. Local areas will need a local nature recovery strategy. You can ask for the Swifts to be brought back. There'll be a new biodiversity net gain requirement on all developments. So not just putting back what they've lost, but getting back more. Local residents have to be consulted about street tree felling, that's after the Sheffield disaster. Landowners able to conserve land, strengthened biodiversity duty. It'll be, instead of having regard to biodiversity, it's expectation to further conservation and enhancement. And local and public authorities had to produce a biodiversity report every 5 years. So there's some hope there. This act's going to be signed off by the Queen, I think this year or early next year. When it is, use it. Just use it. Get out there and say to your councillors, your planners, there's this act. You've got to do it. And Swift's bats, easy peasy. Just please get out there and do it and plant lots of trees that will support insect life, lots of hedges that will support insect life, not alien species, not ginkgo trees, not New Zealand flax. Anything that grows from England to India is going to be useful to our biodiversity. So big choice, lots of plants, get them to put them in. Please help Swifts. Thank you very much for listening to me. I do hope this has been interesting. And if you've got some questions, I'll try and answer them. Thank you very much.
Edward, thanks so much. That is brilliant. Love your enthusiasm and commitment to the cause. And we have had a few questions come in, a little bit of overlap, and you've answered a couple of parts of them or the whole ones. Mm-hmm. Abby asked, first of all, early on, what's the highest they fly? Is there a record for how high they've been observed?
Well, I've seen them at 8,000 feet in the USA. I think it's probably getting on for the highest they go, but there are different species with different strengths. They might well go 10, 12,000 feet. They can cope with depleted oxygen, that we know.
Yeah.
I think it's probably a question of how cold it gets. Yeah. The higher you go, you get more and more temperature loss. I saw my Swifts in the Black Canyon in Colorado. It was snowing, snow on the ground. It was probably about -10. I was up there looking for, I think, blue grouse or something, and we saw the blue grouse walking down the gutter in the road on the way up, so we ticked that one off. And when we got to the top, I went over to the visitor platform, which is one of those terrible vertigo-inducing things that sticks out over the edge of the Black Canyon. And I was trying not to look down too much, as I was looking straight out into the blizzard, and the blizzard was coming from the left to the right, and there were these white specks going from right to left. And I thought, what on earth are they? So I got the binoculars onto the white specks, and they were white-throated swifts, which have a short migration run, all within the USL. Mexico to like Las Vegas is roughly their migration run, not very long. And they were powering through the snow. And you think about it, snow, no water, the water's frozen probably, no insects, how are they doing it? And they were definitely 8,000 feet, because I checked the height of the Black Canyon, and they were level with me. So yeah, very tough, sub-zero temperatures, no food, maybe some water in the river down below if it was keeping moving, and 8,000 feet. So my guess is they probably could go a good bit higher.
Yeah.
In warmer weather.
High altitude pilots see them quite a lot, don't they, as well?
Yeah. They unfortunately get into jet engines quite a lot. Yeah.
Tash asked early on as well, and you did answer some of this, but there's maybe a little more to talk about. if they've survived 49 million years, why have they become so endangered now? And she said, is it down to loss of nest sites? You touched on pesticides, but I guess climate change is also causing a factor here with their migration route and conditions along the way.
Yeah, we're starting to see problems with climate change. Yeah, with freak weather events is what is doing it. Swifts have not changed the times of migration. For example, warblers in Spain have changed their migration time by about a week. They're even 10 years ago, I think it was by a week. They were getting to Spain a week earlier than historic records showed, which meant they were out of sync with the local insect populations. So they were finding food problems because the insect populations in Spain hadn't hatched out in sync with the bird's arrival. But swifts hadn't changed their migration times, and in fact haven't changed their migration times hardly at all. But they are hitting these freak storms. And so in the past 8 to 10 years, we've had several mass slaughter incidents, mass mortality incidents of swifts, as I described earlier. Other than that, it's us. It is us, what we do to buildings and what we do to insects. Insect killing has become a sort of multinational mega industry. You think before the Second World War, it was very hard to kill insects, and most homes were probably infested with cockroaches, fleas, black beetles, woodworm, you name it. Food was very hard to preserve from insects. You bought a bag of flour, there probably would be flour beetles in it, or quite often flour beetles in it, or mealworms living in it. I saw all these things as a child, especially in Paris. I mean, my dad used to work in France a lot, and Paris was just one living mass of cockroaches, as I remember as a child. Yeah, we've got rid of them all. Now, we've got rid of them all. I mean, it's nice to live in a house that hasn't got cockroaches, and it's nice to have products that are not infested with weevils and mealworms and what have you, but the cost has been that we've wiped out the insects in the outer world as well, and we're moving on to wipe out all insects. And insecticides like the neonicotinoids, which are something like, I don't know, 2-3 billion times as toxic as DDT. There's some incredible figures about neonicotinoids, are getting everywhere. They're starting to kill fish or to starve fish because the runoff from the fields gets into the rivers and kills off the water insects that trout and salmon rely on. So they're getting absolutely everywhere, and they are killing everything off. Now, this is one of the main horrors. The other is buildings. For the first time ever, we are building a complete country of buildings that cannot host bats or birds. Everything we've built before, possible exception of some Georgian buildings, which are a bit sort of box-like, but everything before, Tudor, Jacobean, Victorian, Edwardian buildings, they were all ventilated richly with air to keep the damp out. They didn't have damp courses. So water moved up the building hygroscopically, sucked up into the building. All the things buildings were made of absorbed water, wood, plaster, brick, cement, all that lime cement, it all absorbed water. And water goes up in the building, so you have to get air running through the building, through the loft, huge amounts of air to get damp out of the building. Now we have sealed, dried buildings, and this is the norm. About 100, 150 years ago, we started changing building materials from wood, plaster, cement, tile, slate, to modern materials like concrete, reinforced concrete, plastics, mastics, sheet metal, steel buildings. Being the first of these in London, Houses of Parliament, first air-conditioned building, Selfridges, the first steel frame building, and they just started it off. Last to go were domestic houses. Domestic houses were still ventilated in the old-fashioned way right up till the 1960s, and then it changes. And the new buildings going up are sealed. Nothing can use them. So big, big problems. The insecticides, the buildings, no nest places, no food. That is the problem.
Yeah. Nigel has asked, but then he said it's kind of answered later about colony nesting. Can you just talk a little bit, Edward, about the importance of kind of hearing other swifts, especially at new nest box schemes, and that does tend to draw them in. And Nigel also mentioned about house sparrows nesting colonially. You were saying to me before we went live tonight that actually the presence of house sparrows will sometimes draw swifts in as well. Is that right?
That's right. Yes. Yeah. House sparrows nest colonially, a good deal more argumentative than swifts are at the colonies. What you find with swifts, they can be very dense colonies, like they can be sort of several within a few meters, or they can be very loose colonies. Where I used to live in West Hampstead, we had a nest in a house, and then gap of 3 houses, nest in another house, gap of 3 houses, 3 nests in a gable. It seemed to depend almost entirely on architectural features. I mean, where a water pipe came out, there'd be an oversized hole and the swift would get in beside the water pipe. Where there was a brief bit of gable with access into the loft, there'd be 3 nests. So it is, again, it's opportunistic, but they do like to hear other swifts. It seems to give them reassurance. It seems to make them if other people, it's like if you go into a shop. If you go into a shop that's got nobody in it, within a few minutes, there'll be 3 other people in it, because somehow or other your presence reassures other people that there's something interesting in there. So they go in to have a look. So same with swifts. If they hear another swift in a nest, they'll go and have a look. Also, if they hear sparrows, they will go and have a look, and they will sometimes evict the sparrow. So quite good. If you've got sparrows in your swift nest box, they'll probably get a brood off before the swifts come back in, first week in May, and shove them out. So you get both sparrows and swifts nesting in the same nest box.
Yeah, and they're both priority species on Ealing's new biodiversity action plan. So we'll be happy if we have sparrows nesting in them as well. Yeah,
that'll be great. The only place I know in London with a good sparrow population right now is London Zoo.
Yeah.
They do very well there, and I think it's quite interesting vis-a-vis the shortage of insects, because sparrows rely on soft insect food for their chicks for the first couple of weeks of their life. They have to have soft insect food, and at London Zoo, I've seen the sparrows go into the vulture cage, pull red meat off bones, and fly off with it. And I reckon it's a substitute for caterpillars and grubs. They found that the red meat is equally soft and accessible, and saves, trying to scour the bushes for perhaps non-existent grubs, caterpillar things. Yeah.
Maybe people in Ealing feeding our newly arrived red kites will help the sparrow population.
They certainly will. They certainly will. Yeah. Can't wait for them to come over here. My wife saw one over Hampstead Heath, over the pond, was it Whitestone Pond at the top of Hampstead Heath last summer. She saw a red kite over
there. They're I'm delighted to say they're becoming 10 a penny here. We're seeing them every day in Ealing. Yeah. So really, really great to see them. Tash asked, and I know Tash does have some swifts nesting in her roof space and her neighbours. If you have swifts nesting already in eaves, is it better to add boxes nearby rather than drill holes or replace bricks?
Well, let's put it this way. It depends on how much disturbance. If you can do this work when the swifts aren't there, you won't disturb them. The other thing is, you think maybe of economy or longevity. If you use a swift brick, it's there for the life of the building. If you put a box up, the next person who owns the building might take it down, or it might rot and fall off eventually if not cared for by some subsequent resident. So I would always say, if you can do it, put in swift bricks. If not, a good high quality box, which you take care of.
How close should the new box be to where I know they nest already, because they've been doing it for 10 years?
A metre or 2.
Okay, so I can move it to the front of the house and let them keep their side kind of eaves. Great, thank you. Nobody else will be moving into this house. I'm dying in this house. It's okay.
Yeah, but after you die, you've got to think long term.
I'll put it in my will.
You must put a covenant on the house. It must be swifts in perpetuity.
Brilliant.
Perhaps a curse to be more appropriate and cheaper. You have a plaque inserted in the wall saying anybody messes with the swifts is cursed forevermore.
Brilliant.
Thank you.
Lots of messages coming through saying thank you. Edward is so good. Fascinating and fabulous listening to you. Thank you. Julie said she has swift zooming past her windows several times a day during the summer. They're so fast, impossible to count. She has various swift boxes, but yet to put one up. I have worries around bird mites. What's your take on this, please?
Well, if you got them in a box, swifts do not seem to have mites. They do have parasites, but those parasites, being parasites, stick to the swifts. They have no desire to stick to you. They can't live on you, these parasites, and they're not going to get into the house. I mean, there's no more chance of anything in a swift box getting inside your house than there is, say, a passing eagle. It's just not going to happen. They're outside the house, you're inside the house. Don't worry about it. Those mites or parasites will want to stick to the swift because they live on their blood. So you don't want to move too far away from dinner, and you certainly don't want to move a long way from dinner. So no, don't worry. You're only going to catch or pick up a swift parasite insect if you handle the swifts, when one may move onto you. But the only people who ever meet a swift parasite are ringers and people who clean out nest boxes, which you shouldn't really do, but some people do. Yeah,
great stuff. Final question from Abby says, you said they live a long time. Do they suffer any diseases? What causes?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. We have reports of mortalities in swifts. Nearly always hypothermia and starvation. Sometimes they seem to have died as a result of being bitten by some mites. This has only happened on the continent, and we're not sure what species the mites were. This was discussed at a swift conference 10 years ago, I think. Frankly, I don't know. I mean, One of the things about bird mortality is that swifts spend nearly all their time in the sky. And so if they drop dead out of the sky, they'll either fall into the sea or they'll fall into the land and be eaten by a fox or something. If they die in the nest, there's not that many people out there willing to do autopsies. We have found dead swifts in nests, old age, cold, who knows?
Yeah, I think generally it would be.
Yeah, there's some reports of mites having caused swift deaths or possibly implicated in swift deaths. There's no firm evidence yet.
Yeah, so I think, Abby, generally it would be kind of loss of fitness or ability to survive as they get older. And certainly those harsh environments.
It's called old age, Sean.
Yeah. We're all going that way. Just to say,
they don't get bus passes, the Swifts. They've got to keep going.
No, that's it. They still have to make those big long distance
That's
trips.
it.
Yeah. We have engaged luckily with the council. I think Ealing Council do deserve a lot of credit compared to boroughs in London. We do a lot of work in partnership with the Parks team and the Ranger team on various conservation projects in the borough. And as I say, they have just kind of are nearing completion on launching their updated biodiversity action plan.
Mm-hmm.
The current one in its current form is from 2009, so quite out of date. So that's about to launch soon. And I've been doing a lot of work with them on the kind of species action plans, and we have put swifts firmly on the agenda. So I have a list, and we've started creating a database as well of current sites that support breeding colonies of swifts. But I'm glad you put up Ealing Council Town Hall on there, because that's on my list, on my target list for public buildings and schools to target first. For our boxes. Would you have advice, Edward, on playing the calls? Is it right that you play them at the start of the season when new birds are arriving and at the end of the season as well? Yeah,
that's right. That's right. There's two phases, you see. There's swifts arriving back who find their old nest place has gone, and they may nest if they find a new nest place quickly. So play the calls at the beginning of the season for the, as it were, evacuees, the ones who've been driven out. Then we know that young swifts in their final juvenile year, before they leave for Africa, in July, they look for a place to nest the following year. And so they are busy looking for nest places. You'll see them clinging to eaves and peering in and that sort of thing. So play the calls again at the end of the year, last 2 weeks of July or last 3 weeks of July, say, and see if you can attract some new swifts to nest there next year. Then the next year, when they come back, they may only do a practice nest. They will build a loose, fluffy nest, that's like a little ball of feathers, and they will sit in it, but they won't breed in it until the following year, when they have got a nest, they feel more confident, they've practiced breeding, and they'll come back and do it for real.
Great. And you call those ones that are kind of prospecting bangers, right?
Well, some people do, because they bang onto the building. But that's a very interesting phenomenon. Sometimes they drive themselves into a frenzy. I remember I walked around the corner once to go to the post box or Sainsbury's or something, and they were banging away like mad on the house in the corner, which has got a sort of turret, and the swifts are nesting under the edges of the roof of the turret. And they were going mad. They were even pulling each other off the building in their sort of frenzy. It was truly remarkable, and that's what banging is. And it seems to suddenly sort of just happen. They're all at the building. So we don't know what it's about, but they certainly do get very excited.
Good stuff. And we have one last late question from Nigel, who asked, will swifts use conventional nest boxes? I think like kind of blue tit boxes or great for other species, Nigel, is it?
No, they will use starling nest boxes. I think a blue tit box is just too small a hole. The hole has to be basically 28 to 30 millimeters by 65 to 75 millimeters. You don't want to let in starlings unless you're very, very keen on starlings, because starlings are the one antagonistic species. Swifts can evict sparrows, they can evict sand martins, that sort of thing, but they can't evict starlings. They have fights with starlings, and starlings have fights with swifts, and they can be nasty. They can end up with a dead bird. So you really want to sort of look after your starlings on one side of your house and the swifts on the other. So and a box with the entrance 30 mil high will let in starlings. So 28, 29 mil will probably keep them out.
Yeah. So
you can use a starling box. You can use a starling box, which is like a giant blue tit box, if you get the hole size right. You'll find the details somewhere on my website on the DIY nest boxes page. I've got friends in Denmark who started off accidentally. They put up starling boxes because they like starlings, and they got swifts. Now, later on, they found a load of swifts dead at the bottom of the starling box, and they think it's because they couldn't climb out. The walls were too smooth. It surprised me a bit because they've got very sharp claws. Something went wrong. But make sure, if you're going to use a traditional type of nest box, which is very like a woodpecker nest hole, after all, tall, thin hole at the top, that the inside is rough. Inside is rough wood, and then the birds can climb out and use it.
Yeah. But the best thing to do is to do a tried and tested swift design box.
Yeah. I mean, it's fun. Tree nest boxes are fun, and you might want to make one up and see what turns up. I mean, it could be woodpeckers, it could be
parakeets,
it could be parakeets. I mean, it's. I rather like the parakeets. Got loads here.
Yeah, lots here too. We put up a little owl box last weekend, and we had within a day we had a parakeet checking it out. So. It's a funny looking little owl, I said.
Well, I went bird watching to India years ago, and I went on an all-night coach journey to Agra. And as we drew into Agra, dawn broke. There was this tree with a hole in it by a zebra crossing, and we stopped the bus, you see. And this parakeet pops out of the hole, and I said to it, "I haven't come all this way just to see you,
Brilliant. Well, look, I think we'll leave it there. We could talk all night, I'm sure, on this topic. And Edward, I want to thank you again for getting in touch with us proactively and offering to talk to us. Nigel, I think, has his hand up. I don't know if he has one more question. No, he's fine.
No, he's just waving.
One.
Yep.
Yeah. So yeah, thank you again.
Well, thank you.
Say to anyone watching, if you do, and you can see on this last slide, swiftconservation.org is a brilliant resource for everything related to swifts. Any questions you have, if you have builders in the area doing work, it's got resources on there to share with them. If you are thinking about putting up a swift box yourself or a couple of swift boxes, do get in touch. We are going to be getting a contractor involved to put up all the boxes we managed to raise with our own fundraising appeal. If you haven't donated yet, please think about doing so. We need to get final push, and we've only got 10 days left. And if you have donated, thank you so much for doing so. We've been overwhelmed with the response, but we'd love you to do one last favor and push it on your own social media channels and talk to friends and family about supporting the cause as well. Because if we get up these 150 or so boxes now, they hopefully will support swifts for many generations to come. So Edward, thanks again, and been an absolute pleasure. And I will sign off there, folks. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, Edward.
Thank you. It's a pleasure. Bye.